Ok, xin chào tất cả các bạn học sinh và các thí sinh đã đến tham dự workshop webinar online của IDP ngày hôm nay. Không biết là các bạn có nghe thấy chị nói không nhỉ? Nếu mà các bạn có nghe thấy chị nói thì có thể chat vào phần chat box được không? Rồi, ok. Chị xin tự giới thiệu, chị là Bạch Lan Hương, phụ trách phát triển bài thi IELTS của IDP tại khu vực miền Bắc. Ngày hôm nay thì cũng đã rất lâu rồi thì IDP mới phải tổ chức một buổi workshop theo hình thức online. Còn lý do thì chắc là các bạn cũng đều biết rồi, là tình hình dịch hiện nay đang rất là căng thẳng, đúng không? Bây giờ cũng đã là 6 giờ 10 phút tối rồi, thì không biết là các bạn đã ăn tối chưa? Các bạn có thể chat vào trong chat box được không? Bạn nào là đã ăn rồi này, bạn nào chưa ăn và bạn nào đang ăn thì có thể chat vào phần chat box được không? Học xong em ăn luôn. Rồi. Rồi, đã có rất nhiều bạn chưa ăn và cũng có một số bạn đã ăn rồi. Vừa nấu vừa nghe. Rồi, cảm ơn tất cả các bạn. Thật sự là rất là cảm ơn tất cả các bạn, bởi vì giờ này các bạn đã trải qua một ngày chắc là cũng phải học online khá là nhiều môn, nhưng mà vẫn dành thời gian cho IDP vào khung giờ này để có thể tham gia cái buổi workshop ngày hôm nay. Thế cho chị hỏi thêm một câu là các bạn đã thi học kỳ xong chưa? Những bạn nào mà đã thi xong rồi, hay là những bạn nào còn một số môn? Có bạn nào là mùa hè đã đến sớm không? Thì có thể mình chat vào phần chat box nhé. Và có một bạn Mai Quỳnh thì đã thi xong từ hôm 10 tháng 5. Bạn Phi Hải thì lại chưa thi. Wow. Có rất là nhiều bạn cũng chưa thi đúng không? Wow, còn có một bạn còn chưa thi gì. Có những bạn thì lại thi xong rồi nhưng mà vẫn phải học online cả hai chương trình. Rồi. Thực sự thì chị thấy rằng là năm học vừa rồi là một năm học rất là nhiều biến động và cũng rất là nhiều khó khăn với tất cả các bạn học sinh trên cả nước. Và chị nghĩ rằng là đến giờ phút này thì không những là các bạn mà kể cả bố mẹ các bạn cũng đều rất là tự hào, bởi vì là các bạn đã nỗ lực hết sức trong một cái năm học vừa qua, cũng như là đã làm điều tốt nhất có thể để các bạn có thể kết thúc một năm học. Và chị tin rằng đây sẽ là một cái năm học vô cùng đáng nhớ cho tất cả các bạn, và cũng thể hiện được là cái tính kiên cường của tất cả các bạn để mà mình có thể kết thúc được năm học này, đúng không? Một lần nữa thì chị xin chúc mừng tất cả những bạn mà đã hoàn thành thi xong và mùa hè đã đến rồi. Còn những bạn mà chưa thi thì chị cũng chúc các bạn là sẽ tập trung và cố gắng ở những cái ngày thi cuối cùng này, vượt qua tất cả những cái khó khăn để mình có thể đạt được kết quả tốt nhất. Hôm nay thì chị cũng có đọc được một cái bài báo nói về một bạn học sinh trước đây là khi mà bạn ấy thi vào lớp 10 của một trường chuyên thì bạn ấy đã trượt, nhưng mà ở thời điểm này thì bạn ấy đã chính thức được 4 trường đại học hàng đầu của Việt Nam được tuyển thẳng. Và cái việc tuyển thẳng của bạn ấy, ngoài cái kết quả học tập trên trường thì có một phần rất là lớn nhờ là kết quả thi IELTS của bạn ấy đã được 7.0. Và chị thực sự rất là mong muốn tất cả những bạn ngồi đây, nếu mà chưa đăng ký thi IELTS hoặc là chưa có chứng chỉ IELTS thì sẽ cố gắng đăng ký thi và có kết quả thật tốt, càng sớm càng tốt. Bởi vì với các cái chính sách của Bộ Giáo dục Việt Nam hiện nay thì chứng chỉ IELTS thực sự là một cái tấm thẻ vô cùng quyền lực để cho các bạn giảm bớt những cái gánh nặng thi cử và tăng được cái cơ hội cho các bạn vào những trường đại học top đầu, cũng như là giành được những cái học bổng rất là lớn để theo học tại các trường đại học ở nước ngoài. Và trong cái đợt dịch này thì tuy rằng là IDP đã buộc phải đóng một số cái hỗ trợ về mặt học thuật, tuy nhiên IDP vẫn duy trì những cái hình thức hỗ trợ các bạn có thể đăng ký thi và có thể tìm hiểu về bài thi IELTS một cách thuận lợi nhất. Ngoài hình thức là đăng ký thi trực tuyến thì các bạn đều có thể inbox fanpage của IDP hay là gọi điện đến hotline 1900 6955 của IDP hoặc là có thể gửi email đến IDP nếu như các bạn có bất cứ thắc mắc nào hoặc cần thêm những cái sự hỗ trợ của IDP trong tất cả các hình thức thi giấy và thi máy tính. IDP luôn sẵn sàng hỗ trợ tất cả các bạn. Và trong cái buổi workshop ngày hôm nay thì chị xin chia sẻ là ngoài cái kiến thức rất là vui mà thầy rất là hữu ích mà thầy sẽ đem đến cho các bạn, thì các bạn sẽ có được cơ hội nhận được rất là nhiều phần quà của IDP. Đấy là hộp đựng phụ kiện rất là xinh xắn ở trên tay chị đây, cũng như là iRing để các bạn có thể gắn đằng sau chiếc điện thoại của mình. Các bạn sẽ được nhận những phần quà này nếu như các bạn tham gia trả lời các câu hỏi của thầy, hay là giơ tay để đặt các câu hỏi ở phần cuối chương trình. Và những bạn nào mà được thầy gọi hay là thầy chọn để đặt câu hỏi thì các bạn đều sẽ được nhận phần quà này của IDP. Và ngay khi các bạn được gọi hoặc là sau khi kết thúc chương trình này, các bạn hãy inbox ngay cho admin của fanpage của IDP các cái thông tin cá nhân của mình, như là số điện thoại này, địa chỉ nhà này, tên của các bạn này, hoặc email của các bạn, để sau đó IDP có thể thuận tiện gửi quà về tận nhà cho các bạn nhé. Rồi, và sẽ không để các bạn phải chờ lâu nữa, chị xin được giới thiệu chuyên gia của IDP ngày hôm nay, thầy Kendal Rolley sẽ bắt đầu phần chia sẻ với các bạn. Và chị chúc tất cả các bạn sẽ có một cái buổi chia sẻ thật là hữu ích, và rất là nhiều bạn sẽ được nhận phần quà của IDP nhé. Và một lần nữa thì chúc tất cả các bạn giữ được sức khỏe của mình để vượt qua mùa dịch này. Xin cảm ơn tất cả các bạn. Kendal, I will invite you. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you online this evening. I hope that after tonight you can understand a little bit more about IELTS speaking. It's my first time doing a workshop for IDP as well, so after we finish, I would really encourage you to share any feedback that you have about this with IDP admin or in the chat box as well. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from Brisbane in Australia. Has anyone ever been there before? Oh, we've got someone that's been to Brisbane. Hope that you had a good time there. I first arrived in Hanoi in 2012, so I've been here for quite a long time. I wish I spoke better Vietnamese than I do now. I have a CELTA, of course. I also have a Master's of Applied Linguistics with honours, and I have a certificate with the Australian government, which basically allows me to do training in workplaces and in environments like this. When I'm not working for IDP, I also work as a teacher trainer, and I work in a school in Hanoi, and I also publish some articles about English language teaching and English language learning from time to time in some different places like Mindshift or EFL magazine. So in our format today, what we really want by the end of this workshop is for you to feel confident and you feel ready to take the IELTS test and avoid some simple mistakes. So we'll be looking at some things you can do before the test, during the test, and after the test to make sure that your nervousness doesn't get in the way, or that you're very familiar with the test and so you're not making a simple mistake that you wouldn't make. Also, we're going to have, as you've heard, some fun competitions in the form of questions throughout the presentation. So if you stick with it, there'll be some opportunities to win some IDP stationery. So we really want to encourage you to answer the questions and answer the quiz in the chat box when we get to the quiz, and also make sure you ask any questions. It will be really great if this evening we have a two-way conversation, not just me speaking at you for a long time. So let's talk about before the IELTS speaking test. And one of the most important things you can do is make sure that you are prepared. Like any test with a very unique and specific format, you need to be familiar with the exam itself, which is why you're great here tonight, why it's great that you're here tonight. And it's a very academic way for you to spend a Friday night. The first thing that I can tell you is that there's no magic secrets or shortcuts. The very best advice that I can give you to improve is to improve your general English level, which this advice that I'm about to give you will talk about. So some ways to improve your overall English level. The very best thing that I always recommend to my students, and that you'll find a lot of teachers recommend, is reading. Reading books in English will also help your spoken ability. Reading helps you to recognize new vocabulary through the context that it's in. So if you're reading a book or you're reading a news article or something like that, you're coming across words and you're being able to learn what they mean in a very natural way, rather than memorizing a list of words, which I know you might have been told to do. I really would encourage you just to think about preparing for IELTS. The best thing that you can do, work on your overall general English ability. Another mistake that many English language learners make is that they think that they need a native speaker. It's not true until you're scoring around 8 or higher in IELTS. You can learn a lot from a Vietnamese native speaking teacher who will know the types of mistakes that you are likely to make due to the difficulties between the two different languages. After all, they've spent all this time learning that language themselves, and they know a lot about the differences between the two languages. And in the same way, even talking to a friend can help. It can be a bit strange sitting there and talking to a friend you normally talk to in Vietnamese in English, but it really will help. Practicing a lot with a friend is really valuable, and practicing often, maybe setting up some kind of time, some regular time where you have conversations in English. You can do that in private if it feels a bit uncomfortable to do it out in public at a coffee shop. Another growing trend that you might want to consider is podcasts. If you're not sure what podcasts are, they're a short radio program that you can listen to. There's some great English podcasts out there specifically made for English language learners. The good thing is that they're flexible, so you can listen in your own time. I've personally used them a lot to learn other languages, not Vietnamese though, because as I said earlier, my Vietnamese is not nearly as good as it should be. Some recommendations that I would give you for some podcasts, I'll talk more at the end, but there's one called Simple English Listening, and you can use programs that you might already have. Programs like Spotify or Apple or Google Podcasts. That one you don't have to download an app. But there is also one called Castbox. I'd recommend that one because it lets you increase or decrease the speed of the recording really easily. So what you can do is you can listen quite slowly to get the general understanding. If you're finding it difficult, then you can increase the speed to listen at a more normal rate. Another way, of course, to participate and prepare for IELTS speaking test is to hire an English tutor. Personally, I've used a program called italki as a way to practice with a language teacher, mostly for me because I can be in my own home. And actually, it often tends to be cheaper too. However, for some of you, joining English classes will be a way to also get more of a social component and to be able to hang out with other people that have the same interest as you do in learning about English. The most important thing that you can do to prepare for IELTS speaking is to just surround yourself with English as much as possible. I'll talk more sort of at the end about other ways you can do that, how you can think about English learning in maybe some other activities that you do on a day-to-day basis. The other benefit of a program like italki, and there's lots of other ones as well, that just is one that I can personally recommend, is that if we have times like we have now where people don't really want to gather in groups or can't gather in groups, it's a good way, like I said, to stay at home and to be able to practice in a safe way as well. The last thing that I want to talk about is if you're preparing for IELTS, you're going to have at some point a lot of advice about memorizing phrases and idioms. Please don't. It's really obvious to your IELTS examiners, especially when candidates come in and what you might call idiom bomb. So just every second thing that they say is an idiom, and it sounds really unnatural. Idioms are meant to be a marker of native speech, but if you use them too much or in not quite the right way, they can end up being worse. It can actually end up counting against you if you're not using them. Because if you're trying just to find opportunities to input all this memorized vocab, it's really not going to probably sound natural in both the meaning and the way that you're saying it. Idioms are set phrases too, and they have to be said quite exactly in order to not sound weird. So that's another concern as well. So we've talked for about 5 minutes or a little bit longer. Do we have any questions so far? I'd love to hear any questions that are coming in from you guys in the chat box, or maybe any from the Facebook page as well. I'll just give a minute or so to see if anybody has any. So we had somebody a couple of minutes ago talking about reading skills. There are lots of opportunities for improving your reading skills. And if you follow the IDP page, you'll get lots of tips. Just because this is a workshop about speaking, I really want to stick to the speaking right now. So thank you very much for the question. You'll have lots of opportunities if you follow that IDP fan page to get lots of tips. Okay, Feng Chi, please go ahead and answer that question, ask that question that you have so we can answer it. Okay, so we've got a few different questions coming in. If I practice in front of the mirror, is it okay? That's a great way to practice. An excellent way to practice. Is the only difficulty about that is that you're not always sure if what you're saying is correct. So I would encourage, first of all, to maybe record yourself in front of the mirror so that you can play it back and listen. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is think about practicing in front of the mirror as a really good way more for building confidence and just generally practicing that sort of thing. How can we remember phrases and idioms? Well, Kim Quyen, that's exactly what I would encourage you really not to do. Phrases and idioms, if you're trying to memorize them and trying to use too many in the test, it will sound unnatural, and it could end up working against you. However, there is collocations that I would encourage you to look in. That one more time, that's collocations. That's words that naturally go together in English. But rather than memorizing it, I would encourage you to study it, take a look, and that's going to be really helpful for you too. Ming Nguyen, that is an extremely good question. Why do teachers keep telling you to memorize idioms? That is a really big problem. I would never tell my students to do that, but I can tell you from the other side that it's not a good strategy. Maybe if you're at an IELTS 9 or something, then memorizing a few might be more helpful. But really, for lower level learners, the best thing that you can do is just practice developing that general English level. Okay. Zafui, is it compulsory to use idioms in IELTS speaking part 2? Absolutely not, Zafui. I would really focus on improving that general English level, looking at collocations. Being familiar with idioms is great. I'm not saying don't study idioms, but make sure that you know them in a way and only use them if they sound like they're naturally going to fit. Don't try to just put them in anywhere. UK accent and US accent. There's no one correct accent for speaking English, and the IELTS test has made lots of efforts to make sure that lots of different IELTS, lots of different pronunciation models from around the world are accepted, because there's a lot of people that aren't from the UK, they're not from the US or Australia, but they're still native English speakers, but they might not sound the way that we're familiar with native speakers sounding. So I would encourage that. I would just encourage you to make sure that you're staying, I guess, it is a tricky one. I would just make sure that you stay true to what is what a native speaker might, the way a native speaker might pronounce it, sorry. clumsy wording. Do you need to prepare before speaking test task 3 in 1 minute? Okay, no, so you don't get any preparation time for task 3. I'll be talking a little bit about task 3 in a moment later in the presentation. You get the 1 minute preparation before part 2. Part 3 is just meant to be more of a conversation between you and the examiner, but a more academic conversation than you have in part 1. Banang, I'm not sure what your answer is. Perhaps someone else can help you with that. Nhan Nguyen, what factors? So you get marked on 4 criteria, which is lexical resource, which is the words you use. Are you using them correctly? And are you being ambitious in your vocabulary? Your grammatical range and accuracy. Are you using your grammar correctly, but are you also using more advanced vocabulary as well? Okay. I'm just going to go, I've got a few different, I've got people in the chat and people in question and answer. So I'm going to go to one of the people in question and answer. I'm about to take the test in the next 3 months. Should I completely stop reading Vietnamese books? I don't think that your Vietnamese is interfering with your English necessarily. I would say expose yourself to as much English as possible. Surround yourself with English. That might mean that you're stopping reading Vietnamese in favor of English, but it's not, the Vietnamese, it's not going to interfere with your English necessarily. What can I do to, Hao Ngat says, what can I do to find a native friend to practice my speaking skill? There's not a lot of super easy ways to do that. I think that there are some programs online where you can find, the search term I would use is language exchange. That's language exchange. And you'll be able to find some websites where you can meet up with people. There's a growing interest. I feel there's a growing interest in Vietnamese culture. So you might find some people that are interested in maybe they're planning a trip here or they're planning to move here after COVID. And you might find somebody that wants to talk to you. I usually get, I think what you mean, I usually find it hard to talk to foreign teachers. Can you advise some topics that I can communicate with them more easily? I think certainly people are always, if you're talking to a foreigner, they're going to be interested in your opinions on Vietnamese culture and Vietnamese society. Food is always a really good one that people can connect on. If you're meeting people, if you're meeting foreigners in Vietnam, usually they're going to be people who are interested in travel. So that's a really good topic too. Okay, over to the chat for a moment. Could you please help us to answer questions from examiners as fast as possible? So Anh Tien, you don't want to speak too quickly. You want to speak at a natural pace. So you're not trying to just get through as many questions as possible. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking here, but it's important to speak at a normal rhythm. Okay. Is there any difference in topic speaking between general training and academic? Good question. There isn't. You get exactly the same script if you're exactly the same types of questions if you're doing general training or academic. Okay, what accent should we choose to speak? So some people believe that as you get a little bit more confident in your English, you should choose an accent model. That means that you focus on a particular one that you wish to focus on, maybe UK or US or even Australia. Though I don't know if many people choose that. I think that there's some merit in that. I also think that if you make yourself understood, things like intonation, which we'll talk about a bit later, and stress, they will become more important too. Is it important, Phuc asks, is it important to use complicated phrases in speaking part 3? Ideally, Phuc, yes, you want to start increasing the complexity of your grammar the further you get in. The examiner will also help guide you with that, with some questions that are going to elicit certain grammatical structures from you, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, let me read Fung Chi's. People often say that practice makes perfect, but personally I think perfect practice makes perfect. So can you give me some advice on perfect practice in speaking and writing? So writing is a little bit out of the scope of what we're covering tonight, but like I said, if you follow that IDP fan page, you'll get lots of good information about that. This whole workshop tonight is designed to give you great ideas for perfect practice in speaking. So hopefully by the end of this workshop, I will have answered your question. Okay, how do we deal with a totally new topic? Zui, that is a really tough one. If you get a topic that you're completely not familiar with, I'm going to talk about some strategies for that as we go forward in the workshop. I see there are many topics about IELTS speaking. Do we need to learn many topics? Okay, thanks for the question, Ngan. I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with the kinds of topics that might come up in IELTS speaking. I would also really encourage you to not memorize answers for topics because it's going to sound unnatural. Can I develop my vocabulary and accent through games? Not only vocabulary through workplace, but daily life. Yeah, the difficulty, speaking is a really tough one to practice at home. And I get that because while there's lots of apps to help you with general grammar and vocabulary, being able to know whether what you're speaking sounds correct or not is really tough. They used to have a pronunciation function on Duolingo, which many of you were familiar with. I've noticed that they've removed it, probably because it was very inaccurate. It's really hard at the moment. The software isn't there fully to be able to do that. I have heard good things about one app called Elsa, that's E-L-S-A, like the princess from Frozen. I don't think it's affiliated, but I haven't used it myself, so I can't vouch for it. But that is maybe something you want to investigate as an automatic way of more gamifying speaking training. In terms of vocabulary for workplace, I know it's really tempting. People say, I want to learn vocabulary for X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that is important. Sometimes you're in a particular industry like medical industry or finance industry where you have some really specific topics that you need to know. However, the best thing that I can do, increase your general level of English, and that's going to help make that process really easily. There's not much point in just studying a specific range of vocabulary if you don't have the language to put it all together and to be able to respond in the moment. Okay, podcasters, like I said, simple English listening, and I'll talk about, there's some other ones like the Voice of America podcasts is a really good one too. If you can look at Castbox though, as a way to slow it down, you might be able to find one that's not necessarily designed for English language learners, but because it's something you're interested in, you might find it more useful. Okay, if I'm answering my question in the part one and the examiner stops me, I did bad. Yeah, that would be unusual for the examiner to stop you unless you were talking for a long time and the examiner was trying to make sure that they could get in another question. We'll talk a little bit more about part one and the kinds of timings that you should use in a moment in the next section. I studied at an English center and they told me to record my own speaking and send it to them. Is it an effective way of improving my speaking, or I speak with my friend face-to-face is more effective? Yes and no, Kai. I would say that it might be a really good way to get detailed feedback from that English center, but at the same time, a big part of speaking is listening. And if it's just a one-way conversation, you're not learning to be able to listen to people and respond. Saying that, it could help with part two where you have to do a longer speech. How can I improve my accent? It's really tough. In terms of the sounds, I would recommend familiarizing yourself with the International Phonetic Alphabet. Might be a good way. I'll also talk a bit later about some other strategies for improving your accent. Okay. Part three, we'll go through some tips for part three. We're going through each of the sections bit by bit. Okay, so tu tao, once again, there's no difference there between general and academic speaking. Is it good to use advanced grammar in the wrong way rather than use simple grammar in the correct way? There's no simple answer for that. It would really depend on the situation that you're using. Part two, yes, all the speaking, your score is based on your entire test. So yes, it's possible that you could start off part one really strong and then you could end up decreasing in the mind of the examiner. However, that's normal because the part two, each part is more difficult than the last part. I want to improve my score band. What should I focus on? We'll talk about some more tips a bit later. If I don't use idioms, what's the maximum score? It's not quite a mathematical equation like that, Hao-Nyat. There's lots of other ways to show off lexical resource rather than just using idioms. There's collocations. It's an overall picture. Okay, to use to IELTS daily life, just for college, work, and school. IELTS speaking is designed to be somewhat natural as you can get in conversation without a natural speaking event. Which advanced grammar or advanced vocabulary? Realistically, Zui, both are important. Okay, yeah. So Huayang, that sounds a classic case. So looking at Huayang's comment, freezing up in the IELTS test. Really, it's about practice. You need to be able to be that's going to help your fluency. And be able to improve that. I'm also going to talk to you about a bit of a drama technique that you can use to help with that specific problem a bit later. How many questions in IELTS speaking part 1 and part 3? So in IELTS speaking part 1, you'll be given a series of different questions on familiar topics. It's usually going to be, it depends on how many you get through. You'll have a compulsory frame at the start where you're asked about something extremely familiar, and then you'll be asked about 2 different topics after that about still familiar topics, something like, well, actually, we're going to get to that next. If I skip one question, can I lose mark? Well, technically, you can't really skip questions. That's not really a way to go about it. Okay. Okay, so anonymous attendee does say that that they're nervous about their skills. So once again, practice, practice, practice. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. For now, let's move on to making a good first impression. We'll have plenty of other times for questions later in the presentation. So let's talk about making a great first impression. Whether or not it is fair, in any part of life, people are going to be influenced by your looks, and it's going to impact the way that they treat you. So you have to use that to your advantage. I'm not saying you have to be attractive. I'm saying that an examiner wants to feel that they're a professional, working in a professional environment. And so if you respect them and yourself by presenting yourself in the best way possible, that's going to help you. So that also means not chewing gum, although thankfully I think that's pretty rare. And even though we're all wearing masks at the moment, and make sure you practice wearing one properly before you do the test, because I've seen so many candidates struggling in the test and it's really distracting for them. It's tough doing the IELTS speaking test with a mask on, but it is at this moment necessary for the safety of both you and the examiner and the IELTS staff, support staff. So maybe practice with that. The other thing is, even when you're wearing the mask, you can still tell when somebody's smiling by the lines around their eyes. So smile even though you're wearing a mask, and that will help. Make sure your body language doesn't make it seem like you're bored or unfriendly. So, open body language, not close to the chest, even though it's going to be tough because you're going to feel nervous. So our response is to try and protect ourselves in a way. You have to, once again, that's one of those things that practicing can help. The more confident you feel, the more open your body language will be. Examiners know that you're nervous and they will take that into consideration. At the same time, there are plenty of times where the nervousness does affect the speaking, and that does happen. You can try relaxation techniques before you go in. So things like meditation can help you. Learning that can help you with nerves as well if you're feeling really nervous. And just a last thing, don't sit in the chair that has all the stuff in front of it. It's not going to be a huge deal. If you do that, the examiner will understand, but that's just a general piece of advice. Okay, so someone was asking earlier about how you are marked on the IELTS speaking test. So it comes under these 4 categories, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about what each of these categories mean. However, if you're finding it hard to follow along with the speed of my presentation, or if you just want to look it up later, there are more details on the IELTS website about what a score means under each of these categories. So you can see, for example, what an IELTS 7 in fluency and what a 7 in fluency and coherence looks like, or 5 in fluency and coherence, for example. Now, I'm just going to answer one of these questions that I see because it's relevant before we go any further. Could we shake hands with the examiner? I think that's fine in normal circumstances. However, with COVID, I think it's probably best that minimizing human contact at the moment. So your examiner might feel a bit uncomfortable about that, depending on their concerns. Okay, back to the band descriptors. So let's talk about fluency and coherence. So the questions the examiner is going to ask themselves when they are looking at your fluency and coherence mark is, are you repeating yourself? That's a bad thing. Are you pausing for a long time to find the correct words? Are you using cohesive devices and transitional phrases? Words like so, well, okay. Are you using them correctly? At higher bands for fluency and coherence, you start to see looking for the way that a candidate will build a topic. So for example, do the ideas flow logically from one part to the next? Are you building your topic successfully? In lexical resource, they're going to be asking themselves, what words are this candidate using? Are they using slightly more unusual and uncommon words, but correctly? And it only counts if they're used correctly, which is why I really advise you to be extremely careful about how you're using idioms. Also, I wanted to mention that in this workshop because I know that a lot of teachers in Vietnam are doing that, and it's not always helpful for the students. So a particularly impressive thing for the examiner in terms of your lexical resource is if you can respond with specific subject vocabulary, especially in part 3. So what I'm talking about there is if you're talking about cooking, for example, or cuisine, if you started to be able to show that you understood specific cooking verbs, bake, broil, that kind of thing, in a way that was natural, that would start to sound more impressive because the examiner can go, okay, I've given this candidate a topic, they're not familiar with the topic, and yet on the spot, they were able to use these small specific words accurately and on the spot. If you try to twist the subject around to just include words that you know, that's going to be pretty obvious to the examiner. Let's talk about grammatical range and accuracy. For grammar, your examiner is not just looking for how accurate your grammar is, but also how ambitious it is. So are you using more advanced phrases and sentence structures, or are you sticking to the kinds of sentences that begin always with I and the? You want to try and mix up your sentence structures a little bit. And then pronunciation. Are you able to be understood clearly? At higher levels, do you vary your pitch in a natural way? So your intonation, and we'll talk more about that at the end. For example, as a native English speaker, if I'm rattling off a list of items, there's a sort of natural rhythm we adopt. You only start to learn that naturally in a way that you can do it at sort of higher levels of English speaking. The other thing is, do you chunk words together or do you pronounce each word separately? Okay, so what you're looking for as native speakers, for example, a word like the is always going to be kind of pronounced as, a word like the is always going to be pronounced as the, and it's probably going to be added on to the word that comes after it. So any questions about that? We're coming up to a quiz next. So let's have a few more questions and we'll follow on from that. If I'm an introvert, is it necessary to open body language? My Queen, I really feel sorry for introverts doing speaking tests because they're at a natural disadvantage. If you can find a way to push through that, maybe pretend you are an actor performing a role, it's really going to help you. Body language isn't everything. There's no specific criteria that marks you on body language, but it's something that's always in the background for examiners about the performance. I wish it wasn't, but that's just the way that humans work, I guess. So any other questions from Facebook? Or we had a lot of questions in the first part, so maybe we answered a lot, but specific questions about part 1 would be really, really good. specific questions about part 1 or getting ready for the exam, or the way that you're marked are really good. Okay. Increased band scores for us to use passive voice more than, okay. Not quite sure what you mean there by Ang Tien, but I think what you're saying is it necessary to use passive voice? Passive voice is a more advanced grammatical structure. If you can use it correctly and naturally, it's going to help you, especially in part 3. Okay. Minh Nguyen, yes, actually, now this is really interesting, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. There is actually a degree of intelligence that is involved in the IELTS speaking test. It's not always about language. In fact, if a native speaker were to take the IELTS test, if they weren't somewhat familiar and able to talk about these topics, they might find themselves not scoring at the highest band score. So it's an academic test, and it's in order for them to be able to test your inability to respond to unfamiliar topics, some of the topics have to be more complicated and require you to know some things about society and the world and things like that. The best thing that you might want to do, Nguyen, if you're not feeling confident about that, look at previous topics that you can find online and think about how you would answer that. Determine uncommon words, are we? Once again, anything that gets super specific into the topic that's being talked about. If you're talking about buildings or homes, if you started talking about construction and using words like that, that's going to sound impressive, and it shows that you have a good understanding of vocab. I mean, it could be possible for a candidate to have good vocab, but if they don't show it off, it's going to be difficult for them to achieve highly. Accurately or naturally? I'm not sure that there is naturally by whose standards, Hao Nyat? If you could just clarify that question, that would be really appreciated. So do you mean should you just speak to the way you would normally speak, or are you trying to adopt an accent? Or not quite sure what you mean by that. Passive voice more than active voice. Tien, I think it would sound really unnatural if you did your whole response in passive voice. You're only going to want to use passive voice when it makes sense to do that. Mainly in part 3. Which speaking criteria? They're all equal, Banai. All of those 4 criteria are equal. Tell the way to lengthen your answers. I'm going to talk about that, Zui. Good question. It's kind of like an and then, and then, and then. You just keep building, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Accurate pronunciation or natural pronunciation? Hao Nyat, I think it's possibly quite a good question, but I'm not sure what you mean by accurate and natural there. I'm not sure whether you mean accurate in terms of, because there's lots of different ways to pronounce a word, right? You could have somebody in the UK pronouncing something completely different from someone in New Zealand, for example. They're both native speakers. So there's not always just one way to do it. And I would just encourage you to just keep practicing, basically. What grammars should I use? I would encourage you, Kai, to look up. You can look up some, if you research advanced grammar structures. So it depends, basically, Kai, wherever you're at with your speaking ability right now, if you've been tested on the European framework, so maybe you're a B1 or something, you want to try and push just for that level slightly above yours. If you're B1, you'd research B2 grammar. And look at what kind of structures, look up examples of what kind of grammar is expected at a B2 level and work towards that. Okay. Okay, Minh Nguyen, that's a really tough question to answer. There is an element of performance to the IELTS speaking test. There's no one correct. It is a tricky question. You've asked a very good question. Ideally, the answer, which is not a great answer, is to have a balance of both. I think that natural talking, if you're at a high enough level where you're using some more advanced grammatical and vocab naturally, is going to be better. But you also have to make sure that you're speaking and providing longer answers as well. What should I do when I don't have the knowledge about the topic asked? Yeah, once again, another good question and not an easy one. Just draw on anything that you can possibly remember about the topic. You could try also to speak just what you know, like I said. Advanced grammar structure, I don't like books that are specifically related to one element of English. I like more of the courses. I really like using English File as a resource personally in my classrooms. I find that really helpful. So an English File I've been using, for example, with some of my grade 12s this year, English File Advanced. It's testing at a C2 level, so it's quite challenging, but it's a good way to learn English, all elements of English, sort of at the same time, and they have some more interesting topics there, which keeps it more interesting for the students too. Formal words, yeah, in part 3, but remember, speaking generally is less formal than reading or writing. So if you try to use the wrong kind of language that we wouldn't find in speaking, then it might end up counting against you. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about discourse markers later in the presentation, the difference between the kinds of discourse markers we'll find in speaking versus in writing. Okay. Yeah, so 365 has asked, is there a problem if I mix British and US accent? I was talking about that before that question came up. The answer is I'm not sure. I don't think so. The examiner's not looking necessarily for one specific type of accent. However, I can imagine a scenario in which it's the difference between like an 8 and a 9. That's where I think it might come in. At the beginning, should we answer what examiner asks, or should we give greeting question like, how are you? Fung Chi, good question. Just stick to what the examiner asks you in that first bit. I'm going to be talking about that in a little bit too. What is the most important part in the IELTS speaking? Technically, officially, they're all equally important. I think there's a good case that part 3 is the most important because it's the last thing, the last impression you give to the examiner before they give the score. So that's what I would say is the most important. It's important to know about vocab that's included in a specialized area. So what I was saying about that is overall your general English level can help you develop topic-specific vocabulary. Don't try to go away and memorize lists of subject-specific vocabulary or anything like that. Just try to increase your overall level of English. I have quite a high-pitched voice. Do I have to lower my voice to sound more like a native speaker? No, there's many native speakers with extremely high-pitched voices. I wouldn't think that the pitch, the natural pitch of your voice would make that big a difference. Okay, let's move on, and we're going to go to our first quiz question. So if you have the correct answer, type it in the chat, or question and answer, up to you. And the first 2 people to answer will get the prize. So are you ready? Okay, hopefully it's not too difficult for you. First quiz question, it's a multiple choice. Which of these is not a criteria for IELTS speaking? Lexical resource, question comprehension, fluency and coherence, or grammatical range and accuracy? Okay, we had our 2 first ones there already. Okay, our winners, and remember to contact IDP admin, who will tell you, who will get your address details so they can send you. So our first 2 winners are Kim Kuyen and Quang Kai. Well done, congratulations. Don't worry, there'll be other questions. There'll be 4 more questions with 2 winners each throughout the rest of the session. Okay, just quickly while we've got that, oh, sorry, we have skipped ahead a little bit. I just want to answer a question. If I make the examiner angry or unhappy, will it affect my score band? Officially, no, Kai. That would be very unfair for the examiner to do that. If you think that that's affected your score, there are administrative procedures to handle that. You can query your results where a third-party person can check the results. That's more on the administration side, though, and kind of a little bit out of the scope, but a good question nonetheless. Okay, let's move on. Some general tips for part 1. If you keep getting asked why by the examiner, it means your answers aren't long enough. You need to be prepared to answer why, even though it might not make sense or you feel that you've answered the question already. We'll talk about some ways to handle that a bit later. Please do not just sit there silently. If you don't understand the question, ask. It's much better than sitting there and saying nothing. Really, I can't encourage you. It's okay if you don't understand a question. You can still get a really good band score. It's not a big trouble. Often, all the time when I'm speaking to other native speakers, we don't hear something and we ask why. It's fine. It doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't understood. It just means that you need some more information. Especially, even better, ask for the meaning of a particular word. If you've gotten a question and you don't understand one of the words in there, ask that specific question. Okay, remember that nobody is going to fact check your answers. I won't encourage you to lie, but especially if you're going to ridiculously lie, but remember you're expected to be able to answer any question, even if that means shifting the conversation to the experiences of your friends and families. The other thing is tenses. It can be really easy to forget to stick with the tense. One thing that Vietnamese speakers often do, they will switch the first verb to the past tense and then just continue practicing, just continue in the present tense with all the subsequent verbs. So really, when you're starting to get to those higher band scores, it's somebody that's nailing that past tense, especially every time that it comes up during the test. So this was a question that was asked earlier about what you should say in that introduction part. When they say to you, this is the speaking test for the International English Language Testing System conducted in blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me your full name, please? Just tell them the full name. Don't go into a practice monologue or introduction. It's not part of the test, that part. It's just trying to get your basic information. Part one, try to aim for 20 to 30-second answers. That's perfect. Speak at a normal speed. Similar to the way that I'm speaking now, maybe a little bit slower is okay. Talk to the examiner in part one as if you're having a conversation. It's okay to be casual. It's okay to be informal. You can use that more academic vocab, that more formal vocab in part three. So answering naturally rather than trying to come pre-prepared with an answer. Okay, so here are the questions that you'll be asked. Question 3 might not get asked. That's an optional one, so you might not get that. If you want to tell them, my name is Zahui, but I prefer to be called Johnny, you can do that. The examiner may or may not even refer to your name throughout the test. This is what you'll hear in the first part. The language is not really assessed that you're telling us. It's just to tell us what your identity is and all of that kind of thing. But pay attention to the examiner's words in this part. Part of the benefit of having this introduction here is for you to be able to get used to the sound of the examiner's voice and the way that they speak. So you might, for example, have an English teacher right now that you're familiar with the way that they speak, but when you speak to other people from other places, it's really hard for you to understand them. This is the same kind of thing. Use this as a way to get yourself familiar with the examiner's voice. Okay, so you might be already used to the kinds of topics that you're likely to receive in part one. On the IELTS website, which is IELTS.org, you can see some more samples. Part one is all about seeing if you can communicate opinions and information on everyday topics, very normal, very familiar topics. So one might be, let's talk about your hometown or village. What kind of place is your hometown? So how do you answer that question? That's a tough one. What kind of place? So you might start to use lots of adjectives to describe that place. That's a pretty open question. You could say a lot of different things. What's the most interesting part of your town or village? Is your village famous for something? If it isn't, you could say it, nobody's going to check. What kind of jobs do people in your town or village do? That's a question that you should be able to answer. If you're from a big city, you could just stick to say, well, this is a good opportunity actually to display some less common language. Actually, I'm not from a village or town, I'm from the city. And in my city, in my area of the city, people often work in banking and finance and all kinds of white-collar jobs. All right, would you say it's a good place to live? Might be another question that you're asked. Okay, let's move on to talk about accommodation, might be the next one. Accommodation, if you're not sure, means houses or the place where you live. So you might get the question, tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in. Now, you might not know that word accommodation. Don't just sit there, ask the examiner, accommodation, could you rephrase that? And they say, okay, it's the place where you live. All right, so now you know and you can keep going. It's much worse just to sit there. You might get asked, how long have you lived there? What do you like about living there? What sort of accommodation would you most like to live in? So this is a way for you to show off some vocabulary. Do you know the word caravan? Do you know the word riverboat? If you have a more complex word, you can show it off, even if you'd really just like to live in an apartment. Okay, birthdays. So here's another sample topic. Maybe you don't have a strong opinion about birthdays, but you should keep practicing speaking confidently no matter what the topic is. For part one, I would recommend taking a part of the question and reframing it. For the first point here, do you enjoy your birthday? You could technically answer yes. However, that's not going to make a great impression on the examiner. You could answer in a full sentence. Yes, I do enjoy my birthday. But that's still really too short. So, general rule is to answer the question in a full sentence, then expand. So let me give you an example. Do you enjoy your birthday? So, yes, I love birthdays. Now, why? Birthdays to me are a special time of year where I feel really appreciated by my family and friends. Another thing to think about is what tense you should answer based on the question that you were asked. Can anyone tell me what tense this first point should be answered in? Let's see if we have any grammar experts in our comments. Past, okay, do you enjoy your birthday? Present, yeah, I would stick with present simple. I agree with Nhan Nguyen. Okay, so think about what tense is being elicited from you. What tense is the examiner trying to get from you in that context? If you get asked why at this point by the examiner, it means that they want more information. So in this case, you would need to talk about why your birthday makes you feel appreciated by your family and friends. Let's talk about the next one. Do you usually celebrate your birthday? So tense, once again, present simple. Maybe you don't do much for your birthday. Then talk about why. Maybe your family has never seen birthdays as a big deal. You might say, oh, we don't really go out to restaurants or anything like that, like other families. We just stay inside, maybe share a meal as a family. It's all very casual. Okay. So what did you do on your last birthday? Careful with the next one. What tense are we asking for here in the last birthday? Yeah, so Fung Lei got it first. Okay. You need to answer in past tense and you stay consistent. I'll take about 5 to 10 seconds just as a pause now. I want you to think about how you would answer that question. What did you do on your last birthday? Okay, so I've got a model answer here for you. Oh, that was a lot of fun. We, that is my mum, my dad, my brother and I, all went to a restaurant to celebrate. And when we sit down, we see, I've made a mistake there. I put the first verb into past simple and then I forgot. So let me say that again and you can hear where I've made a mistake. Oh, that was a lot of fun. We, that is my mum, my dad, my brother and I, all went to a restaurant to celebrate. And when we sit down, we see. So this is a really common thing that we see from candidates. Let me show you how you would say that correctly. Oh, that was a lot of fun. We, that is my mum, my dad, my brother and I, all went to a restaurant to celebrate. And when we sat down, we saw, okay, so there were two verbs there at the end that should have been put into past tense. Okay, can you remember a birthday you enjoyed as a child? Yes, so it's past simple. Once again, it's something that started and finished all in the past. Okay. I like this last question because it's one of those ones that you might find it hard to answer, but you're still expected to be able to answer. So which birthdays are considered important in Vietnam? So in Australia, the 18th and the 21st birthdays are major, as well as the 50th tends to be a big one. I don't think it's quite the same in Vietnam. I asked a Vietnamese friend about this, and she said maybe 18 and 30, but it's not as big a deal. So it's a good example of a question that might be difficult for you to answer, but part of IELTS speaking is all about improvising. And I'm going to say that word again later, improvising, because it's a good skill that is taught in drama and acting that will really help you in preparing for IELTS speaking. So just a few questions because we're getting quite far behind with our schedule. So I'm just going to answer a couple. Don't worry, I'll stick around as long as it takes at the end to answer questions that people have. Okay, I'll just give you a little moment to ask any questions that you have. Hopefully I'm not speaking too quickly for you at the moment or too slowly, and you can follow along with the things that I'm saying. Thanks for everybody that's been participating when I ask a question and answering in the chat. Should we get used to different accents while practicing instead of sticking to native speakers? Yeah, I think that this is a really a part of English language teaching that often isn't taught enough to students. These days in the world, there are so many different accents of English, and so often you just get you just learn about accents from the UK and US and maybe Australia. There are so many different accents out there. And your IELTS speaking examiner might be somebody with a fairly strong Scottish or Irish accent, or somewhere else too that has a strong Australian accent. Can sound really difficult. So familiarizing yourself with that is not easy. There's no real easy way to do it. I've been looking for many years to find a resource that teaches this in a natural way. There is some databases of accents from around the world. If you Google accent database, you'll be able to find that if there's an accent that you are really curious about. It even has the Vietnamese speakers of English and everything on there. So that's accent database. I think if you Google that, it should take you to the right place. What kind of tense when I describe a film or a novel? Vanang, that depends on how the question is worded. Is it a film you watched and really enjoyed? Or is it a film that you love, plural? Sorry, present tense. So really listen carefully for the verb tense that is in the question. That will inform the way that you answer. Okay? Past perfect for past questions. It's really hard to find a natural way to use past perfect there and make it sound natural. It's a rare tense. There was actually a study done of an ASEAN meeting where all these heads of governments from Vietnam and from Singapore and Malaysia were all gathering together to speak, and the common language is English, of course. And I think they found that 90% of the time they were just speaking in present simple. And then there was like 5% past simple. And then the remaining 5% was a combination of basically present perfect and maybe past and present continuous. These tenses get taught to you in English language schools, but in reality, they're not always used or necessary to use. Then again, once you start getting to higher band levels, you're really going to want to show off your grammar and you're going to want to show that you have that ability. Thank you, Miss Wan. I'm glad that you're listening and hearing my my words clearly. Okay, no problem, Mandy. Hoping to provide some more too in the next little bit. Is it possible that your IELTS examiner is not a native speaker? To be able to be a IELTS examiner, your examiner has to achieve native-like competency. So they have to be shown to be exactly the same as a native speaker. Okay, which one do examiners usually prefer more? Fluency but lack of information, advanced grammar but enough information. I mean, I think these questions that relate to which is better than the other can be difficult for me to answer. In this case, I would say what you're saying is not as important as how you're saying it overall. When you think about the fact that pronunciation and lexical resource and grammatical resource make up 75% of your score, you have to look at it statistically as being more important, the way that you're saying something and how you're saying it, rather than exactly what you're saying in terms of information, but it is going to affect you if you don't develop your answers there. Can you recommend some tenses we use in the speaking tense? Present, past. Once again, there's no real shortcuts here. I think that it's really good to improve your overall general level of speaking. If you find a natural way to use a first or second conditional correctly in a natural way, that might sound more impressive. Should I describe the event I've experienced or an imagined event? If you cannot find, once again, I can't encourage you to lie. At the same time, nobody is going to be fact-checking your answers, okay? So that's something to be aware of too. Okay, let's move on. There'll be more time for questions in a moment. I think we're going on to a quiz now though. So, we ready for the quiz? The quiz questions are going to get a little bit harder here. So, the next quiz question is just true or false. So we're going to see some fast fingers here. True or false? You should prepare a short speech to use when the examiner asks for your name. Okay, we've got enough answers already. The answers keep scrolling. I can't. Okay, so Nhan Nguyen, first correct answer, false. And Kai, you got it false, but you've already got a prize. I love that you're participating. Can we give it to someone who hasn't gotten it before, either Minh Nguyen or Ngọc Linh? I'm not sure which one hasn't gotten it yet. It would be great to make sure everybody gets some of that IDP stationery. Okay, no, so you're not going to, the test doesn't start until you've heard, let's talk about houses, okay? So don't try to come up with a speech. Don't try to tell the examiner the meaning of your name, anything like that. Everybody's on a strict timing. They need to get through a certain part of the test in a certain amount of time. And it's important just to move on. Thank you to all of you who answered that question. Hopefully we can get some more prizes to you guys later. Okay, next. Let's talk about part 2. Going on to part 2, what you have to do. Part 2 can be quite scary, having to speak for 2 minutes on a topic. And like you said, it might be a topic that you're not familiar with. So hopefully I'm able to give you a few tips now that make it less scary. So firstly, I would recommend scanning the topic. Ask if there's a word that you don't or can't understand. It's much worse to speak about the wrong thing than to ask the question. It's even worse to not be able to say anything when the preparation time is up because you just have no idea what the word accommodation means, for example. Note-taking. There's a lot of opinions about note-taking. It's probably something that some people feel very strongly about, how you prepare for that in that 1 minute time. I'm going to tell you some things that might be against your own experience. I can only give you my advice, and also some advice based on research that I've done. So probably out there, if you've studied a little bit of IELTS, you'll have some strategies like doing a mind map, which means putting a circle and then lots of different things coming off it, and maybe words or topics that you want to talk about it. Or maybe WH questions, writing who, where, why, what down the side of the page. I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide and some suggestions that I personally have for note-taking. So the next thing is you have up to 2 minutes, and I would really encourage you to use the whole 2 minutes. You need to show that you can talk adequately and at length about this topic. If you don't get to 2 minutes, you might still have been able to talk adequately and at length about that topic, but it doesn't mean that you've been able to. Basically, if you talk for the full 2 minutes, you're maximizing your chances of being able to do that. Now, the other thing is you might be asked a follow-up question at the end. That doesn't necessarily mean you haven't done a good job or that you haven't done part 2 adequately. It's just a nice way sometimes to transfer. It might be a chance to get less formal and get more unprepared remarks. So this is my very controversial things about note-taking. Just like I told you not to use lots of idioms, this might be something too that sounds surprising to you. In preparing for this workshop, I wanted to research if there was any data on what was the best strategy for note-taking. And actually, the evidence of the study that they did was that there was no particular strategy that helped or harmed anyone, that made any major difference to performance. However, there's going to be things that work for you. There's going to be strategies on taking notes that you feel comfortable with. They did encourage one thing: write codes for the grammar points that you want to use, such as past at the top of the paper, to help remember to keep verbs in past tense if the question is asking you about something that happened in your past. So writing that at the top might be a good reminder for you to keep your answers in past tense if that's something you struggle with. Still use a planning technique or a note-taking technique if it helps to reduce your nervousness. And you could brainstorm topic-related vocabulary as well, might be a way. I find personally planning notes out, like I did for this exact workshop, to be very comforting. I might be able to sit here and talk to you about IELTS for an hour and a half, but it's going to be a lot better and I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable if I've planned out the notes that I want to say. All right, let's keep going. Here's an example of a part 2 topic. Describe your favorite teacher. So they're always going to be topics that everyone should be able to talk about, usually. If you hated all your teachers or hate all your teachers at high school, this would be a really difficult question to answer, but you'd still be expected to. Here we can see WH trigger words: who, when, what. So make sure you answer these. The first 3 points may not take you that long. In fact, it's answering that final point, explaining why they are so important to you, that's going to take up, I think, the majority of your time. You want to go into more detail and build up a strong response by really explaining the impact of that teacher on your life. So if we're looking, we talked earlier about specific vocabulary, topic-related vocabulary. So for a topic like this, curriculum, timetable, and delivery. So when we talk about delivery in education, we're talking about how the teacher delivers a lesson. Learning strategies. So word like learning strategies, talking about group work, projects, these are all good vocabulary to use. I really appreciated the way that this teacher taught me. He always used group-based activities, and that's the way that I like to learn. Another good term is a word called, a phrase, pastoral care. Now, if you're not familiar with that, that might be a good new piece of vocabulary that I've taught you tonight, or at least once. You might need to practice it. Pastoral care. Pastoral care is how much the teacher cares about the learners and how they help to develop them. So you would have had hopefully you had a really good Vietnamese homeroom teacher when you were in school and secondary school, someone that really took care of you both as a person, not just a student. So pastoral care is something that you could talk about. Education's a common topic. As I've said, though, I've seen a lot of IELTS materials where you're just given like a list to memorize. I, once again, don't believe that those shortcuts like that are a good strategy. If you find that memorizing a whole list of words works for you, great. I would encourage you in that case to use a program like Quizlet or Anki Deck on your phone to help you memorize. I personally have studied Japanese, and I found it Anki really good for if you've ever studied Japanese, you'll know that there's a lot that you just have to memorize. And so I found that quite helpful. But overall, just the focus should be on generally raising your English level. The more comfortable you are in speaking it, the better you will do in this test. Before we go on, I just want to answer Ming Nguyen's question really quickly. Is it okay if I don't take notes? Absolutely, it's okay. The examiner doesn't look at your notes either while you're doing them or after. It just goes into a plastic folder. Okay, so it's fine if you don't take notes, if that's not something you feel comfortable with. Okay, I wanted to show you an example of one here. This is the way that it would look to you in the exam. Describe something you own which is very important to you. The reason I wanted to show you another example is it has these rounding off questions at the end. These are the kinds of questions that the examiner might ask you at the end. So rounding off questions just serve to help you relax. They help you to get back into question and answer mode. You've just spoken for 2 whole minutes, and sometimes it's good just to get back into that habit of answering quickly, that kind of thing. The other thing is try to choose something a bit different and unique to demonstrate you can speak about more complex topics rather than my iPhone. If you talk about my iPhone, you might give a really good answer, but it's going to be a little bit basic. So I would encourage you to think about something a little bit more deeply. Obviously, you don't have much time, so that's always a struggle too. Okay, now this is kind of just meant to be a bit of a funny thing, because I did find on one of these IELTS preparation websites, this idea, this ridiculous topic that I don't think would ever get asked, to describe your favorite curtain. You should say, which curtain is it? When and where did you see it? What it looks like? And why you liked it so much. That is a ridiculous topic, but I think what it proves for me is that you have to be prepared to speak about any topic that you're given. So, do you have a favorite curtain? Okay, maybe not. It would be a bit strange if you did, but you should be able to answer that question anyway. All right, let's keep going. So general tips for part 2, use tips for using the preparation time. Don't idiom bomb the examiner, as we talked about earlier. Make sure you're only using those idioms if they're appropriate, not trying to find ways to put them in there where they don't fit. It's like trying to shove a puzzle piece where in a place that it doesn't fit. Make sure that the tense of your answer reflects the tense of your question, okay? So if we just go back for a moment, your favorite curtain, that's going to be a present tense one, which you own, which is very important, present tense, but where you got it from is going to be in the past, okay? When and where did you see it is going to be in the past. Why you liked it so much could be either. Okay. Try to push through that to that 2 minutes. Try to be stopped by the examiner without too much hesitation. This is definitely something you can practice at home by yourself. That's the perfect one for in front of the mirror. That's the perfect one for recording yourself. The one where you have to interact back and forth with someone, that's where it gets more difficult. Now, I want to talk also about the difference here. It says use discourse markers. I want to talk about the difference between spoken and written discourse markers. So, for example, avoid using more complex discourse marker like moreover. It doesn't sound natural. Use instead a strong also instead of moreover. Most common discourse markers in speech are the really simple ones. Right, well, anyway, okay, so, all right, that's going to make you sound more natural. So am I saying don't use moreover? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Moreover doesn't really make sense in this kind of speaking test. The other important thing or mistake to avoid, don't just see some keywords and assume you know what the topic is asking. Read the prompt carefully to make sure you're addressing it. Once again, if you have the ability to show off a more complex answer to the question, avoid just sticking to the simple responses. Show off your vocab, show off your grammar. Okay, part 3. What do you have to do? Now, part 3 is where the examiner is really going to start testing the limits of your language. Ultimately, it should be more of a two-way conversation, like part 1, but your answers are going to be a bit longer. So, best avoid giving really long answers to questions as you may have been taught. Make sure you answer the question thoughtfully and in depth, but don't just keep talking for a minute. That's too long. Also, avoid using first person in this section or referring to examples of people you know. That's appropriate and good for part 1 and part 2, but not in part 3. The reason is that the examiner is trying to see that you can discuss the topic first raised in part 2, but in a more general and abstract way. Overall, speaking about personal experiences is one of the easiest things to do in another language, which is why part 3 is aimed not to do that. It's more of an academic section of speaking where you start to talk about ideas and concepts. So here's an example of the kinds of questions that you might get. Now, ideally in the test, the examiner will take the answer that you give and ask a follow-up question specific to what you've just said. If we look at this example, what makes a good student? the very first question could easily be turned personal, but that's not the right thing to do. So what makes a good student? I feel that a good student should be diligent, self-motivated, and capable. There's a good answer. Now let's extend it. That's why I make sure I always do my homework. No. See, I've made the mistake of bringing my own opinion into it. Could you say my sister always works very hard? She's a really good example of a diligent student. No. However, a different way to say that, a different way of extending your answer might be, students in my country can progress to prestigious universities and successful careers if they have these 3 personality traits. So what you're going to do, what makes a good student? This is what makes a good student. And then this is what this means. This is the impact. This is what happens next. Okay. Part 3 not only tests your English language abilities, but also your intelligence. I'm sure many in Australia would have a problem answering point 2, despite being native speakers. I'll take 5 to 10 seconds to let you think about how you would answer point 2. What role should the teacher have in the classroom? After you think about it, I'm going to give you my example. Okay. So my answer would be, personally, I feel like a teacher should act as a facilitator, providing the tools for students to learn, but not being the one person to provide all knowledge. Okay, can you think in this example about what tense points 3 and 4 are trying to elicit from the candidates? How has teaching changed in your country in the last few decades? So that's maybe the examiner trying to elicit a bit of present perfect from you. This is the way it has changed. So it's something, the change started in the past, but it's extremely important right now. Okay, what is the difference between the way children learn and the way adults learn? It's a complicated question, but the tense should be just probably past simple. I would say that children learn more naturally, but adults tend to need to put more deliberate effort into something. Okay, general tips for part 3. So more than ever in task 3, you're being asked to develop and extend your answers. So you can think of why a good student, I'm getting a bit mixed up. So you can always think of why to develop your answers. A good student is one who always puts in their best effort. Why? Because this means they're not going to miss key information. Why? Which in turn will lead them to achieving well on exams. Okay, so you can keep extending your answers through a combination of phrases and clauses. Collocations, most of you will know what that means. If you don't, you should really research it before doing your IELTS test. It's words that fit together and seem natural together. And it's a really key difference between higher and lower learners. If you can learn it naturally by exploring a love of reading in English, it's going to be more effective than learning this through a memorized list. As you probably know from your English journey, learning English is very complicated, and there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of things that you need to learn. That's why it's almost impossible, like my own experiences in learning Japanese, just to memorize whole things, whole huge collections of information. That's why people say that, these languages are some of the most complicated to learn. Discourse markers, once again, remember there's a difference between the ones that you use in writing and the ones that you use in speaking. Another tip, think about the action word in the question that you're given. Predict, disagree, describe, compare. They're going to be slightly different. So for example, if I predict, I might be being asked to talk about the future. So predict means to think about something that's going to happen in the future. So that's probably eliciting a future tense. So what will happen? Describe, you're going to want to use lots of adjectives there. Compare, you might want to use comparative language. And you might want to you might even get a question that elicits the first, the second, or the third conditional. So what would happen if robots replace teachers? That's going to be a second conditional question, okay? I think that would be very dangerous for students because the robots might just go crazy, okay? Better than saying nothing. Okay, third quiz question. Are you ready? Okay. See how much you were paying attention. So first two answers get the stationery prize. What's one thing you need to avoid in part 3 of the speaking test? Bit longer to type the answer to this one. Oh, might be a bit harder. First, don't talk too long. Okay, yeah, I'll give you that, Vanang. That's a good answer. Okay. Talk about ourselves, Mandy. That's a great answer. Okay, that's the one I was looking for. So Mandy and Van Ang, you get the prize for this one. We've got 2 more questions, and they're coming very shortly. I realize we're a bit over time. I apologize for that. I'm happy to stick around if you are. If you're not, completely understand if you've got something else to do. Okay, so I'm going to get through. For a lot of people, stress, intonation, and timing is a difficult thing. Pronunciation. I just wanted to speak about that a little bit more and encourage you to research sentence stress and intonation before attending your IELTS test. So stress means thinking about what word of a sentence should have focus on it, which syllable of a word might have focus on it. Similarly, intonation is a natural rise and fall of our speaking. It's when it's the way that native speakers are naturally going to go down or up at the end of sentences, for example. You really need to look into that. Pronunciation is difficult. I would recommend also researching some of the most common problems that that Vietnamese speakers often have with pronunciation, because if you know it, you can avoid it. So off the top of my head, most common problems for Vietnamese speakers with pronunciation is not pronouncing the end of words or over-pronouncing it, especially with the S or Z sound that comes at the end of plural words. TH sounds are difficult as well. All right, so we have an example here about chunking, which is packing your words together in a way that makes it easier for the listener to understand. Not pausing enough. If you keep speaking as if you're going to continue, is not easy to understand. The sentence gets harder and harder to understand. It's not just about full stops and commas. It's about less clear moments to change our tone and pace, and pause when necessary. So one way I suggest is to repeat back parts of TV shows or movies, trying to mirror or copy not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it as closely as possible. Okay, fourth quiz question. Write your answer in the box. Let's see how much you're paying attention. Another opportunity for prize. What's the name for the natural rise and fall of our speaking? Do you remember that one? We got 2 winners already. Wow. Fung Lei and Tao Ka Pham Thi, you are too fast. You should win some typing awards as well. Okay. All right. Any questions? Let's go to some other ideas for resources, and then I will do a question section that will be the last one. Okay. So some suggestions. Some of these I've mentioned, some of them are new. You can go to the official IELTS website, IELTS.org, and the IDP fan page as well on Facebook. Castbox was the one that I mentioned for podcasts. So that's the one where you can slow down the podcast if you like. Some podcast examples are Simple English Listening, Voice of America podcast. Simple English Listening have a Facebook page too. You can type that in and see it if that's the way you'd like to get it. A Voice of America podcast gives you lots of different topics. Now, this one's something cool that I've discovered, which is language learning for Netflix. It's a Chrome extension. So if you watch Netflix and you watch it in Chrome, you can build on an extension, and it allows you to like highlight words and find out what they mean and that kind of thing. It's pretty cool, and it's free. Reading, like I said right at the start of this workshop, is the biggest suggestion that I can give you. And you can read novels in English, but you don't just have to read novels. You can read news articles. You can read subreddits. If you're not familiar with Reddit, it's a website where you can find things that interest you specifically, whether you like sewing, whether you like surfing, whether you like video games, a particular kind of video game. And it's a really good way to engage with a community of people that all feel the same. And it's all done in English, so you can really find a way to practice more informal English usually too. Research improvisation. That was the last thing I wanted to tell you. It's an acting technique where you go on stage and you learn to just react. Anything that comes at you, you have to find a way to pretend like so it goes, okay, you're a king in a castle and someone comes to you holding a royal banana and you have to just go with it and say, okay, yes. Learning that skill, I can really see the application to IELTS speaking, because if you're not comfortable answering topics that you're not familiar with, this is a really good way for you to get familiar with that. So the name of the technique is improvisation. It's a drama technique that might help you. And it's being used sometimes by English language teachers in the classroom to build fluency amongst people too. In part 1 and part 2, can I use my personal experiences? Absolutely you can, Kai. That's the perfect place to do it. Before I go on to more general questions and our final quiz question, I wanted to know if anyone had any other podcasts they could recommend to other students today, because the best resource that you've got in all of this is each other. You can use the IDP fan page as a way to build a community of people that are also interested in learning English like you. But I just want to know if anybody has any podcasts that they could recommend to any of our other participants. Just give you guys maybe we don't have a whole lot of podcast fans here. It's still relatively new and uncommon in Vietnam. I'll get to your question in a bit, Kai. Does anyone have any other just general English learning resources that they could use? You have so much experience out there that can help others. You don't need to wait for me to be, or someone like me to give you all the answers. You have already found a lot of the answers and you can help each other, I bet. Okay, so someone's recommending a podcast. I haven't heard of this before. So Dat Ngo sounds like a Vietnamese person that's learned to speak English. Perfect. They can tell you some of the common things to remember or the common mistakes. Luke's English podcast for English accent listening. Thank you, Mandy, for the suggestion. Teenager Therapy on Spotify. Okay. BBC News World Service. Okay. So if you get your news from Vietnamese sites, you could switch that to BBC. That might be a good thing to help you practice your English. So Minh Nguyen's doing a second information about troubled teenagers. It's a good way also just to learn English, as well as being about teenage troubles that they have. Okay, troubles teenagers have. Any other resources that people use to learn English that they really find work for them? Spotify, okay. Huayang, there should be lots of podcasts on Spotify that you can use. They're getting more and more podcasts on there too. Okay, so let's go to more general questions. First, actually, one last quiz question. So are you ready? Last quiz question, and then we'll throw it open to any general questions as our final thing. Okay. The next quiz question is, what was the name of the type of drama that I said might help you prepare for the IELTS speaking test? Okay, Le Tu Ang. And Minh Nguyen, did you get one already? Okay, Minh Nguyen gets one. Sorry, Minh Ngọc. Sorry, Le Minh Nguyen Ngọc. Just on the third. Okay, so Minh Nguyen and Le Tu An get one. Okay, congratulations, guys. Now, it's been absolutely a pleasure being with you here tonight. I would like to know if you have any final questions that you might have about the IELTS speaking test. Okay, Ngọc Ling says, friends. Yep, friends are a great way to learn and practice with. If they're learning English as well, you can help each other. You don't need a teacher always. You can learn a lot from each other as well. So any other questions? I'll give you a couple more, give you a minute or so. Not everybody's as fast a typer as some of these people like Lei Tu An, very quick typer. Well, maybe we've covered all the questions. I think Kai had one earlier that I didn't get to. Let me just find out. So Kai said, is rounding off questions an introduction used to grade the score? The introduction isn't really used, that introduction section, but the rounding off, absolutely. Okay. Can we have an example or a sample video of online IELTS speaking tests? I'll let IDP maybe answer that, but I know that there are a lot out there on YouTube as well. And they sometimes even have what band score was achieved by the candidate, so you can see what that looks like. But I mean, you could have an two IELTS 7s that look a little bit different from each other as well. All right, well, if that's it, that is where we can end the presentation. Once again, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this session tonight with you guys, and I wish you all the best in preparing for your IELTS speaking test. I'm going to go off camera and let IDP come in and just take it over from here and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you, Zung. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you. All right, I'm just trying to.
Thay mặt IDP, mình xin cảm ơn tất cả các bạn đã tham gia và lắng nghe hội thảo trong gần 2 tiếng của ngày hôm nay nhé. Các bạn đã được thầy gọi tên, thì vui lòng gửi thông tin của mình gồm có tên, số điện thoại và địa chỉ gửi tới fanpage của IELTS IDP, ghi rõ giúp mình là nhận quà workshop 21 tháng 5 giúp mình nhé, để IDP sẽ gửi tặng các phần quà dành cho các bạn. Cảm ơn các bạn đã tham gia buổi hội thảo của ngày hôm nay nhé.